Hey fellas, this is Collin and you're watching Faceoff, where I compare and contrast any two games that are vaguely connected to each other, and I decide which one is superior. And for this episode, I'll be looking at two RPGs set in medieval backdrops, CD Projekt Red's The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and Skyrim, the fifth entry in Bethesda's Elder Scrolls franchise. Both are widely acclaimed and highly beloved by critics and fans alike, and despite some obvious surface similarities, they're fundamentally different games and offer vastly different experiences. Both are generally hailed for being touchstones for fantasy RPGs, but as the format of this segment suggests, only one can be deemed superior. CD Projekt Red began working on the Witcher franchise after reaching a deal with Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski to adapt his works into video games with the condition that nothing they made would be considered canon alongside his novels. And with that, CD Projekt Red released the first game in the trilogy in 2007, which was also the first game the studio had ever made, and it showed with the visuals and mechanics being primitive even for that time. They would improve in all fronts with the sequel that came out 4 years later, and with this success, the studio set out to make their magnum opus with The Witcher 3, a game they hoped would be a new standard bearer of sorts, and some might say they succeeded. The Witcher 3 was released in 2015 to wide acclaim, and still sells at a high clip to this day thanks in large part to the recent success of the Netflix TV show that's also based on Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher novels, and just general good word of mouth. It was clear to many that CD Projekt Red had made something special with The Witcher 3, and it was a result of something that was lovingly and painstakingly crafted by a studio that clearly adored the source material. In the first two games, Geralt comes down from a major case of amnesia, which served as a clever way to introduce this world to players who may not have been familiar with the novels it was based on. In The Witcher 3, Geralt has regained all of his memories, and it pretty much carries on from the events of the last novel, The Lady of the Lake. Despite this, the game and all of its lore still feels accessible to players who are not only aware of the novels, but also haven't played the first two games. You quickly get a sense of what kind of character Geralt is, a former human who's been mutated into a witcher, people whose job is to accept contracts to kill monsters, but as the number of monsters start to dwindle, the obsolescence of witchers begins to rise, and so begins the public animosity towards them. Anyways, Geralt is tasked by Emperor Emir var Emreis to find his daughter Ciri, who Geralt also considers a daughter of sorts. Meanwhile, Ciri is being chased down by the Wild Hunt, a group of otherworldly elves who want Ciri for her elder blood, which allows her to travel between different dimensions. Before this happens, Geralt must travel the lands of Belin, Novigrad, and Skellige, and search for his dear Ciri amongst a backdrop of war between struggling northern kingdoms and a southern empire that threatens to take over the whole continent. The Witcher 3 is different from other fantasy RPGs in that you don't really get to customize your protagonist beyond some of his abilities that you can choose to upgrade. You're strictly role-playing as Geralt, whose appearance and backstory is already established. But on the same token, Geralt isn't a blank slate like many other RPG protagonists. He has depth, and is as equally flawed as he is virtuous while living in a world that doesn't have room for moral exclusivity. You make choices between lesser and greater evils. There isn't any choices in which you can either build an orphanage or kick a puppy. Sometimes in particular, you make a choice where you offer a struggling patient some medication that comes with its own set of risks. You find out later that the medication helped, but it left her in a vegetative state, and you wonder if it would have been better to let her die with some dignity. Another example involves the Bloody Baron and his wife, who is suffering an eternal servitude to the local witches of the woods, the Crones of Crookback Bog. Geralt is tasked with killing a local spirit named the Whispering Hillock by the Crones, and you're given the choice of either killing or sparing the tree spirit. Killing the tree spirit allows the Baron's wife to be freed from her servitude, but it also results in the orphans being sacrificed to the Crones. Sparing the tree spirit saves the children, but then the wife gets punished and remains in servitude. Almost every choice is bittersweet and brings about terrible consequences, and that's because the world of The Witcher 3 is non-binary, in which the lines between evil and virtuous are always blurred. It's cliched to say that the world of The Witcher resembles our own non-binary world, but The Witcher 3 pulls it off, plain and simple. The gameplay, despite its slow combat, also offers a lot of depth, as you're given several ways to deal with enemies, whether it's the runes that you can use to upgrade your swords, or the Witcher signs you can deploy to give yourself an advantage. There's also a ton of strategy involved, especially when you take on contracts. The narrative is where The Witcher 3 shines most, especially the side quests that are given almost as much attention as the main campaign itself. Although they're entirely optional, fulfilling these quests is almost always rewarding, since many of them are integral to the main campaign. and some affect some of the bigger events within the main narrative, such as the side quests involving Ceres and Hjalmar, that play a role in deciding which one of them gets to be king or queen of Skellige, or the last wish with Yennefer, where you can dispel the charm that binds Geralt and Yennefer together, and then they decide if they really love each other after all. With all of that being said, the main narrative certainly holds its own ground as it wraps up the whole Witcher saga in an ending that's even more satisfying than the books. While the story never branches further than the search for Ciri, every stop along the way proves as intriguing as the last, whether you're sorting out the domestic life of the Bloody Baron, navigating the criminal underworld of Novigrad while assisting mages who are escaping a citywide manhunt set in motion by the events of The Witcher 2, or settling royal disputes in Skellige. And along the way you can explore beautifully realized open worlds that are split into 3 separate maps. Calling The Witcher 3 an achievement would be a massive understatement, and it definitely deserves its place as one of the hallmarks of the 2010s in gaming, but so does a certain other fantasy RPG released in 2011. Enough has been said about Skyrim over the past 8.5 years since its release about the imaginative open world, the level of interaction with the environments, and the sprawl of side quests that often come at the expense of its main campaign. In fact, this can be said about a lot of Bethesda games, and it's become overstated to the point where it simply goes without saying. One thing that can be said about Skyrim as opposed to The Witcher 3 is that it strikes a tone early and allows you to become enveloped within its world much faster than The Witcher 3 ever does. You're taken prisoner by a band of Imperials, and right before your head gets hacked off, a dragon interrupts the execution ceremony, and you flee with the faction of your choice before being given a quest to seek the Greybeards on the summit of Mount Anthor, where you learn that you are Dragonborn, mortals who are blessed by the blood and soul of a dragon, and you can absorb the souls of other dragons and use their shouts or thumes to your liking. Once all of that is out of the way, the world becomes your oyster, and you can easily sink days, weeks, months, and years combing through every inch of Skyrim and all of the side quests and loot it has to offer. In fact, you're practically encouraged to ignore the main narrative entirely, given the fact that there's literally too much to do throughout the map. Why waste time with the main story when you can spend hours planting baskets on top of shopkeepers' heads so that you can loot their whole store? And the best thing about Skyrim's open world is that none of it feels random. It almost feels like Arthurian legend in the sense that you're guaranteed to find adventure whenever you roam the wilderness. It's what makes it worth examining and exploring every inch of it. And the dense lore that comes with Skyrim and every Elder Scrolls game is enough to satisfy any high fantasy fan who bothers sifting through all of it. And settling your own conflicts while finding yourself embroiled within a civil war while on the lookout for dragons around every corner is never short of astounding. It's just a shame that we have to navigate this whole game as a blank slate of a character. While it's nice that you can choose different species, names, and classes, your character always manages to feel impersonal as a result. And it doesn't help matters that we often only hear one side of each conversation, as we're limited to hearing everyone's response to our chosen dialogue option. While The Witcher 3 offers more authentic and realistic interactions between characters, and as a result their relationships seem much more organic. Building intriguing and organic relationships in Skyrim is practically an impossibility, and it doesn't help that none of the relationships you build really factor much in the game's ending, as it feels rather impersonal to nearly every event that took place beforehand. The Witcher 3 really benefits from choices and the relationships you build that actually affect the ending of the main campaign. And enough can't be said about the uniform environments that can really only be saved by mods to give some of the elements more texture and color. And also the clunky combat that seems entirely primitive compared to the choreography of the combat in The Witcher 3, where Geralt is seen dancing and pirouetting between enemies, and striking blows that seem to resemble how someone might actually swing a sword. If you can't tell already, this isn't really a contest. The Witcher 3 wins. The Witcher 3 has better combat, coded environments with more dynamic color palettes, weather systems, and civilizations that come to life as opposed to the disparate villages separated throughout Skyrim. And the one clear advantage that The Witcher 3 has over Skyrim is its protagonist Geralt of Rivia. Unlike Skyrim, Geralt isn't a blank slate, and despite the lack of customizing options, role-playing as a character with an actual personality proves as a more rewarding experience than playing as a blank slate could ever be. Thanks for watching Faceoff. Feel free to hit the like button down below, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on Twitter at ZTV Goofing Off. See ya!